I never imagined that the happiest day of my daughter's life, the day I had spent years preparing for, sacrificing for, and dreaming about, would become the moment that shattered me to my core. It was supposed to be a day filled with joy, with laughter, with pride swelling in my chest as I watched her walk down the aisle toward the future she had chosen. But instead, it became the day I realized just how far love and gratitude can fall, and how quickly those you raised, those you protected, those you built your life around, can forget what you mean to them. I still remember the exact moment it happened. The air was heavy with the scent of roses, the hall decorated in a way that sparkled with promise. Guests were buzzing, photographers preparing their lenses. And I stood quietly at the back, waiting for that moment every father dreams of, the moment his daughter takes his arm, looks at him with gratitude, and walks into her new chapter. With his blessing, that was the dream. But reality was much colder. Her fiancé, the man she had chosen, the man I had welcomed into my home, into my life, even when my instincts whispered he wasn't right for her, approached me with a look I will never forget. He didn't smile. He didn't show me respect. Instead, he leaned closer, his words slicing into me like a blade hidden in velvet. "Sir," he said, his voice steady but dripping with disdain, "it would be better if you left. This is our moment, not yours." For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. I thought maybe I had misheard. My ears rang, my chest tightened. Leave? How could I leave? This was my daughter. This was my family. This was the day I had carried on my shoulders, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, until it became a castle for her dreams. And yet, in his eyes, I was nothing but an intruder. I turned to my daughter. Surely she would speak. Surely she would stop this madness, place her hand on his arm and say, "No, he stays. It's my father, and he belongs here." But she didn't. She lowered her gaze, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her silence louder than any scream I had ever heard. That silence was betrayal. It was a blade twisted deeper into my chest than his words could ever reach. Do you know what it feels like to raise someone, to carry them through sickness, to stay up countless nights when they cried as a child, to work double shifts so they could study, to swallow your own dreams so theirs could flourish, only to be told you no longer matter, that you're disposable, that your presence is not a gift, but a burden? That was the moment my heart cracked, and the pieces fell silently to the floor of that perfect wedding hall. My hands trembled, but not from age, not from weakness. No, they trembled because something inside me was waking up, storm I had buried for years. I had been the provider, the silent force, the invisible architect of their comfort. I had been the man who never asked for thanks, who gave and gave, until there was nothing left to give. And how was I repaid? With dismissal, with humiliation, with exile from my own daughter's happiness. I could have begged. I could have pleaded with her to look at me, to recognize me, to remember the man who had carried her on his shoulders at the park, Frode clapped the loudest at her graduation, who had cried when he first saw her in her wedding dress. But no, that part of me, the part that sought validation from those who had forgotten my worth, died in that instant. So I walked. My footsteps echoed against the polished floor, each one heavier than the last, each one carrying the weight of decades of sacrifice. People stared, whispers followed me, but no one stopped me. And in their silence, in their complicity, I realized something chilling to them. I was already gone. The air outside was sharp, almost electric. I inhaled deeply, and with that breath, clarity struck me. They thought I would vanish quietly. They thought I would disappear into the night, heartbroken and powerless. But they had forgotten something. Something so simple, so obvious, and yet so dangerous. Every flower in that hall, every plate of food in the kitchen, every note the band was about to play, every candle that burned with false warmth, all of it was tied to me. Every bill, every contract, every payment carried my name. Without This wedding wasn't a dream. It was an illusion. And as I stood outside, looking back at that grand building filled with people who thought they could erase me, a calmness washed over me. Not anger, not desperation, but resolve. The kind of resolve that comes when you have nothing left to lose and everything to prove. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the contacts list. The florist, the caterer, the band, the venue manager. One by one, there, names appeared before me like soldiers waiting for command. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. You see, sometimes life gives you a choice. You can accept being treated as nothing, or you can remind them that without you, they have nothing. And I chose the latter. But before I tell you how everything unfolded, how the wedding everyone expected to be flawless collapsed into chaos, let me ask you this. If you were in my shoes, if you had been pushed out of the very day you'd had built, would you have stayed silent? Or would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because what I'm about to reveal will shock you. Asterisk, the phone felt heavy in my hand, as though it carried not just numbers, but decades of sacrifice, years of work, and the unspoken truth that no one in that hall wanted to acknowledge. I was the foundation of everything they were celebrating. My fingers hovered over the first contact, the florist, a woman I had met months earlier, her hands stained with soil and pollen as she showed me the arrangements she could bring to life. She had looked me in the eye and said, "I'll make sure your daughter's day is unforgettable." And now, as I pressed call, her voice came through, cheerful at first. "Hello, Mr. Parker. Is everything all right?" I let a silence linger, just long enough to remind myself of what I was doing. Then calmly I said, "Cancel everything. Every flower, every bouquet, every centerpiece. Don't deliver a single rose to that hall." There was a pause, followed by disbelief. "Sir, the wedding is today. Everything is ready." "Not anymore," I replied. "Not under my name. Consider this contract void." I could hear her breath catch, the sound of papers rustling, panic spreading through her tone. But I didn't wait. I ended the call, my thumb moving to the next number. The caterer, a man who had promised me flavors that would make guests remember the feast for years. He answered with excitement, his kitchen alive in the background, pots clattering, voices shouting orders. "Mr. Parker, we're just finishing the final touches. The lamb is roasting beautifully." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the noise. "Cancel the delivery. Cancel everything." There was confusion. "Sir, the guests are already gathering. We have trucks on the way. Turn them around," I said firmly. "The contract is in my name. You won't be paid for a single plate that reaches that hall. Not one." For a moment, the kitchen noise went silent, as though my words had frozen everyone mid-step. And then a desperate plea. "Mr. Parker, are you sure? This will ruin everything." I hung up without answering, because that was the point. One by one, the calls continued. The band leader, his instruments polished, ready to play the songs that would set the rhythm of my daughter's new life. His cheerful voice died the second I said, "You're not playing tonight? Pack up your things and leave." The photographer, the videographer, even the lighting crew, all canceled in minutes. Each call, each word was a scalpel slicing through the illusion they had built without me. And then, the final number, the venue manager, a man who had shaken my hand with a smile when I signed the contract months ago, thanking me for trusting him with such an important day. He answered quickly, perhaps sensing the storm already forming. "Mr. Parker," he said cautiously, "is there a problem?" "Yes," I replied coldly. "The problem is that my daughter's fiancé told me to leave. The problem is that I was made unwelcome at an event I paid for. So now I'm making sure there is no event at all. Cancel everything. Shut it down." He hesitated, his professionalism crumbling. "Sir, with all due respect, guests are arriving as we speak, and they will leave." I cut him off. Because without me, there is no wedding. Remember whose name is on that contract? Remember who has the power here. It isn't them, it's me. I ended the call and exhaled slowly. My hands no longer trembled. Instead, they felt steady, powerful, alive with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. And inside that glittering hall, the cracks began to appear. At first, it was subtle. A bridesmaid whispered that the flowers hadn't arrived. Someone else noticed the tables were bare. No meals being prepared, no aroma of food wafting from the kitchens. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, checking their watches, their voices growing louder as confusion spread like wildfire. The band's stage sat empty, their instruments untouched. The photographer, once bustling and directing people, Smile quietly packed up his gear and slipped out the side door. One by one, the building blocks of their perfect day disappeared, collapsing silently until the absence was deafening. The groom, the man who had told me to leave, began to sweat. His smile, once so smug, faltered as whispers grew into questions, questions into complaints, and complaints into chaos. He looked around, searching for answers, searching for someone to blame. But I wasn't there. Not anymore. And my daughter. Oh, my daughter. She stood in her gown, beautiful yet fragile, watching the world around her unravel. For the first time that day, her eyes searched for me. And for the first time, she realized what it meant to be without the man who had always made sure everything was taken care of. The illusion was crumbling. The dream was burning. And it was only the beginning. Asterisk inside that hall, time began to unravel. At first, it was just a faint ripple, a whisper that the flowers hadn't arrived. A curious glance toward the kitchen that revealed only silence. No plates being carried, no aromas drifting through the air. But like a single crack in a sheet of glass, the ripple spread. Fast and merciless. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Mothers with children tugged at their sleeves. Fathers checked their watches with irritation. Friends muttered under their breath. The band's stage stood empty, a hollow skeleton of wood and wires, mocking the grand celebration that was supposed to begin. And then the whispers began to take shape. Where's the food? Why aren't the flowers here? Something wrong with the schedule? Did they run out of money? First, the questions floated softly, like nervous birds flapping their wings. But as the minutes passed and the truth became harder to ignore, the whispers turned sharp. Guests began standing, walking around, their voices rising. The groom tried to plaster a smile on his face, clapping his hands together as if to distract the growing storm. Please, everyone, just be patient. There's been a minor delay. His voice cracked as he said it, his eyes darting around desperately, searching for an explanation he didn't have. But you see, guests are like vultures when the air turns sour. They can smell weakness. They can sense lies. And one bold voice cut through the noise. A delay? There's nothing here. Where's the food? Where's the music? Where's the ceremony? The groom's face flushed red. Sweat gathered at his temples. He tugged at his tie, the arrogance he had once worn like armor, now unraveling thread by thread. He grabbed his phone, dialing frantically, his voice sharp with panic. What do you mean, canceled? What do you mean he pulled everything? His tone grew louder, desperate. He can't do that. He doesn't have the right, but oh, I did. And with each word he barked into the phone, the guests realized who he was. My name, my role. The father of the bride, the man they had noticed slip quietly out of the hall not long before, suddenly became the ghost, haunting every corner of that failed celebration. And then came the bride, my daughter. Sweet, unaware of the chaos growing outside. Unaware that the dream she had built upon the back of my sacrifices was crumbling before her eyes. When she stepped into the hall, dressed in white, her eyes lit up with expectation. She expected smiles, cheers, the warmth of celebration. Instead, she was met with silence, broken only by murmurs and stares. Her smile faltered. Her hands clutched. The fabric of her gown. What's happening? She whispered to no one in particular. A guest answered before her groom could. There's no wedding, dear. Everything's been canceled. Your father canceled it all. The color drained from her face. She turned to the groom, her eyes wide, pleading for reassurance. Tell me that's not true. But he couldn't. He stammered, his words falling apart. I told him to leave, and she froze. Her lips parted, her eyes filling with tears. The guests leaned in, hungry for the drama, their whispers now a chorus that echoed in the hall. She looked at him, her voice trembling but sharp enough to cut. You told my father to leave on my wedding day. The man who paid for everything, the man who made all of this possible. He tried to defend himself, his voice rising with panic. He was interfering. It was supposed to be about us, not him. He needed to know his place, but the more he spoke, the worse it became. The crowd was no longer on his side. Guests exchanged disgusted looks. Some shook their heads. A woman in the front row muttered, ungrateful. Absolutely ungrateful. And my daughter, standing there in front of everyone, felt the weight of humiliation. Her dream dress, once a symbol of love, now clung to her like a costume in a tragedy. Her hands trembled, her tears fell. And she realized the truth that she had tried to ignore for so long. She had chosen a man who had no respect for the one person who had given her everything. Her voice cracked as she asked him the question everyone was waiting for. Why would you do that to him? Why would you treat my father like he was nothing? The hall went silent, every eye on them, every ear waiting, and for the first time, the groom had no answer. He stood there, exposed, stripped of arrogance. A man who had destroyed not just a wedding, but the fragile trust of the woman he was supposed to love. And as my daughter broke down in front of everyone, her sobs filling the silence, the guests began to rise from their seats. One by one, they left, shaking their heads, murmuring about what they had witnessed. The grand hall, once meant to host laughter and music, emptied into a hollow shell. And somewhere just outside, I watched. Not with joy, not with vengeance, but with the cold clarity of a man who had finally reminded them all, without me, there is nothing but what happened next. That was the moment when the wedding didn't just collapse. That was when everything changed forever. Asterisk the hall had emptied, the dream dissolved, and the only sound left inside was the echo of disappointment. Guests were gone, the music had never played, the feast had never been served. What was supposed to be a celebration had become a public unraveling. And the whispers of betrayal would live longer than any toast could have. Outside, I stood in the cool evening air, my back against the wall of the venue, watching as the last cars pulled away. Their headlights faded into the distance, leaving only silence and the faint glimmer of the streetlights above me. I should have felt satisfaction, maybe even triumph. After all, I had done exactly what I set out to do, reminded them all that, without me, nothing could stand. But what I felt instead was something heavier, something deeper. Not joy, but the ache of truth. And then I heard the sound of footsteps. Soft at first, then urgent. I turned, and there she was, my daughter. Her wedding dress no longer glowing with promise, but weighed down by tears and humiliation. Mascara streaked her cheeks. Her hair that had been so carefully arranged now tangled from her hands, clutching it in despair. She looked less like a bride and more like the little girl I had once carried home after she'd scraped her knees, crying for comfort. But this time, her wounds were far beyond what I could kiss away. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice cracking. I looked at her, my heart torn between rushing to hold her and standing firm in the pain she had chosen to inflict. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling, broken. "Why would you do this to me, to my wedding? You destroyed everything. Do you know what people are saying? Do you know what I just went through in there?" Her words came like arrows, desperate, sharp, but beneath them I heard the fear. The fear of someone who had finally realized just how fragile her world was, without the one person who had always carried her. I stayed silent for a moment, letting the night stretch between us, letting her tears fall. Then I answered, my voice calm, heavy with the weight of decades. Why? You ask me why. You let the man you chose, the man I warned you about, tell me I didn't belong. On the day I paid for, at the wedding I built for you. You looked at me and you said nothing. You turned your eyes away as if I was no one. And now you ask me why. She shook her head, her tears falling harder. I was scared. I didn't know what to say. Didn't want to ruin the moment. The moment, I repeated, my voice rising. The moment was mine too. Do you think weddings are built on flowers and dresses? No, they're built on the years behind them. The years of sacrifice, of late nights, of working 2 jobs too. Keep the lights on, of giving up my own dreams so you could chase yours. That moment existed because I made it possible. And when it mattered most, you let him take it away from me. Her lips trembled. She tried to speak, but her words collapsed into sobs. I thought he loved me, she whispered finally. I stepped closer, my eyes locking with hers, not with anger, but with a truth she could no longer deny. Then why did his first act as your husband to be involve tearing you away from the man who raised you? Love does not erase the people who made you who you are. Love does not humiliate. Love does not tell a father to leave his daughters' side on the most important day of her life. That wasn't love, my dear. That was control. And you let it happen. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I didn't mean to hurt you, she cried. I didn't realize, but I cut her off, my tone softer now, though no less firm. That's the problem. You didn't realize. You forgot. You forgot everything I did, everything I gave, everything I stood for. And tonight, for the first time, you felt what life looks like when I step away. Her hands dropped, her eyes red, her face pale in the cold night air. She stared at me as though seeing me for the very first time. And in her silence, in the rawness of her regret, I saw something shift. The walls of pride she had built around her crumbled. Dad, she whispered again, this time not in anger, not in accusation, but in desperation. I'm sorry. The words hung between us, fragile, uncertain. They were not enough to heal the years of giving without thanks, not enough to erase the betrayal of that moment inside the hall. But they were a beginning. I turned away, my eyes fixed on the horizon, on the darkness that stretched beyond us. Sorry doesn't change what happened, I said quietly, but maybe it can change what happens next. It's up to you. And with that, I began to walk, each step carrying me further into the night, leaving her standing there in her white dress, trembling in the ruins of what was supposed to be her perfect day. She had asked me why. She had begged for answers. And she had received the one truth. She could no longer escape, without respect, without gratitude, without love. There is nothing but what she didn't know. What no one knew was that this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The night felt heavier after my father walked away. His footsteps faded into the dark, but his words clung to me like chains pressing against my chest until I could barely breathe. I stood there, the lace of my gown damp with tears, my hands trembling as silence settled around me. And then I heard him, the man who had told my father to leave, the man I had once believed was my future, calling my name, Claire, said, his voice sharp, impatient, as though I were a child throwing a tantrum instead of a bride, whose world had just collapsed. Stop crying, we'll fix this. We just need to explain to everyone. Explain. I spun around, my voice breaking but loud enough to echo through the empty hall. The chandeliers above us glistened, mocking the disaster beneath them. Explain what, Daniel? That you humiliated my father? That you told him to leave his own daughter's wedding? that you destroyed the one bond in my life that had never broken." He froze, caught off guard by the fury in my voice. His jaw tightened, but instead of remorse, I saw only irritation in his eyes. "I didn't humiliate him," he snapped back. "I set boundaries." He needed to understand this was about us, not him. He was taking too much control, and I wasn't going to let that happen. My hands clenched at my sides. Control? You call paying for the venue, the flowers, the food, the music, the dress, control? He gave us everything, Daniel. He gave me everything. And you had the audacity to push him out of the very moment he made possible. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated, pacing now like a man cornered. "Claire, listen to me. Your father has always held this power over you, and I couldn't let that continue into our marriage. Don't you see? This was the first step in building our life without him pulling the strings." But every word he spoke was another dagger in my chest. I stepped closer, my voice trembling with rage, pulling the strings that man carried. Me on his shoulders when I was too tired to walk. He stayed awake at night when I was sick, working in the morning with no sleep because he had to provide for me. He gave up his dreams so I could have mine. That's not control, Daniel. That's love. Something you clearly know nothing about. For the first time, the mask slipped from his face. His voice rose, sharper, harsher. "And what about me, Claire? What about what I want? Do I matter at all? Or is it always about your father? Maybe I was right to tell him to leave. Maybe you'll never grow up as long as he's around." The words hit me like lightning. Guests who had lingered by the doors gasped, their whispers carrying through the hollow room. Some shook their heads, others exchanged looks that said everything. The groom was no man. Only a boy throwing a tantrum in a suit. I felt my knees weaken, but I refused to let them buckle. I lifted my chin, my tears still streaming, but my voice steady now. "You're wrong," I whispered. "You were wrong about him, eh? And you were wrong about me. Ko showed me exactly who you are, and I see it now. I see it too clearly to ignore." He reached for me then, desperation flickering in his eyes, his hands trembling as he tried to hold mine. "Claire, please don't say that. We can fix this. They'll forget. We'll move past it. I love you." But his touch felt foreign, his words empty, his promises worthless. I pulled my hands back, shaking my head. "Love? You call this love? You embarrassed me, you broke me, and you destroyed the only person who ever stood by me. That's not love, Daniel. That's selfishness. That's cruelty dressed up in a tuxedo." The last of the guests slipped out quietly, unable to watch the wreckage any longer. Soon it was just the two of us, standing in a hall that had once promised joy but now reeked of shame. The candles flickered as though mocking us, their flames dancing in the drafts of a night that no longer belonged to either of us. And in that moment, I knew something deep in my heart. The wedding might have collapsed. But what had truly ended tonight was far more than an event. It was the illusion of a life with him. I turned, the fabric of my gown brushing against the marble floor, and whispered without looking back, "It's over." The word shattered him. I could hear his breath hitch, his footsteps falter. I didn't stop. I walked toward the door, toward the darkness outside where my father's presence lingered like a ghost. And for the first time that night, I felt something close to clarity. This wasn't the end of my story. This was the moment it began again. Asterisk, the night was quiet when I left him behind. The hall that once shimmered with chandeliers and laughter had become nothing more than a hollow shell. I walked into the cool air, the gravel crunching under my shoes, my gown dragging behind me like the ghost of a promise that would never come true. My tears had dried into lines across my face, but inside I was unraveling. Every step felt heavier, every breath harder, and then, through the blur of the parking lot lights, I saw him. My father, standing near his car, his posture straight, his hands tucked into his pockets as though he had been waiting all along. He wasn't pacing, he wasn't restless, he was calm, so calm it frightened me, 'cause that calmness wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence a man wears when he's finally had enough. "Dad?" My voice cracked as it left my throat. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting mine, and in that instant I felt smaller than I had ever felt in my life. Not because he was angry, not because he shouted, but because he didn't need to. His silence was louder than any scream. I hurried closer, tripping on the hem of my dress, my chest tightening with every step. "Please," I begged, my hands outstretched, desperate to close the distance. "Please, don't walk away from me. I made a mistake. I see it now. I should have spoken. I should have defended you." I let him, my voice broke into sobs. I let him ruin everything. He studied me, his expression unreadable. Not anger, not pity, just the weight of years carried in his eyes. And then finally, he spoke. "No, Claire, you let it happen." Words sliced through me. I staggered back as though struck, my breath catching in my throat. "I didn't mean to. I was scared." "I thought you thought wrong," he interrupted, his tone steady, sharper than any blade. "You thought your silence wouldn't cost you anything. You thought you could stand there, say nothing, and still have everything handed to you. But life doesn't work that way. Respect doesn't work that way. Love doesn't work that way." Shook my head violently, my tears falling again, my voice cracking as I reached for him. I didn't want to lose him. And in the process, he replied, his voice heavy, "You nearly lost me." The night swallowed us, the silence thick and merciless. I felt the ground tilt beneath me, my knees buckling as I collapsed onto the gravel. The dress pooled around me, torn and stained, no longer a gown but a cage. I buried my face in my hands, sobbing. "I was wrong, Dad. I was so wrong. Please, please forgive me." For a moment, he didn't move. His figure was still against the glow of the streetlight, a shadow carved by years of sacrifice. Then I felt his presence closer, his shoes crunching against the stones as he knelt in front of me. His hand didn't touch mine at first. He just looked at me, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I forgave you the moment you were born," he said. "Because that's what fathers do. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences, Claire. Tonight wasn't about me punishing you. Tonight was about you finally seeing the truth." I lifted my face streaked with tears, my heart aching. "What truth?" "That without respect," he said firmly, "without gratitude, without loyalty, love means nothing. A man who loves you will never tear you from the people who raised you. And a daughter who truly loves her father will never stand silent while he's cast aside." His words sank into me, heavier than stone, carving themselves into my soul. And in that moment, I saw the depth of what I had done, not just tonight, but over years of taking him for granted, of assuming he would always be there, invisible. Carrying me without complaint, my lips trembled. "I don't deserve you." His eyes softened then for just a moment, though the strength in his voice remained. "Maybe not, but you have me anyway. That's the curse and the blessing of being a father. We carry you even when you forget we're there." And with that, he stood, offering me his hand. I hesitated, staring at it as though it were a lifeline I no longer had the right to grasp. But I took it, and he pulled me to my feet, steadying me when my knees nearly gave way. I thought he might embrace me then, hold me the way he did when I was little, promise me that everything would be okay. But he didn't. He simply released my hand, walked toward his car, and opened the door. "Dad, wait," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "What happens now?" He paused, looking back at me one last time, his face etched with both sorrow and strength. Now you decide who you want to be, my daughter or his wife, because you can't be both. The engine roared to life. And before I could find the words, before I could beg him to stay, he drove into the night, leaving me standing in the parking lot, broken, trembling, and for the first time in my life, truly alone. And as the taillights disappeared, a cold truth wrapped around me like a shroud. The wedding had been canceled. The guests had left. My father had spoken his truth. And I was left to face the ruins of everything I thought I wanted. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end, was only the beginning of the hardest lesson I would ever learn. The next morning, the world looked different. The sky was bright, the sun rising with cruel indifference, as though nothing had happened the night before. But for me, everything had changed. The gown I had fallen asleep in was wrinkled, stained, heavy on my skin. My phone buzzed endlessly on the nightstand, messages flooding in like daggers. What happened? Is it true the wedding was canceled? I heard your father walked out. People are saying he pulled the plug on everything. Is that why the food never came? Family, friends, even distant acquaintances? Everyone wanted answers. And the answers were already out there, whispered, twisted, growing larger with every retelling. The story wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to them, to the guests who had seen the chaos unfold, to the neighbors who loved gossip, to the strangers. Who would turn my humiliation into entertainment? I tried to silence the noise, but the truth roared louder than the lies. Everyone knew, everyone was talking. And everywhere I turned, one name echoed louder than mine or Daniel's, my father's. Some praised him. He was right to do it. How dare they treat him that way? Others condemned me, ungrateful daughter. Threw away her father for a man who didn't respect her. The voices blended into a chorus of judgment I couldn't escape. Daniel called me too, again and again. His messages were desperate, angry, pleading. We can still fix this. Don't let your father win. He manipulated you. He wanted to ruin us. Don't give him that satisfaction. But his words, once sweet, now rang hollow. Every message was poison disguised as honey. The more he spoke, the clearer I saw. He had never loved me for me. He had loved the control. He had loved the idea of cutting me from the roots that had always nourished me. And so I silenced the phone. That afternoon, I drove to my father's house. My hands shook on the wheel the entire way, my chest heavy with the fear that maybe he wouldn't open the door. That maybe last night had been the final break. When I arrived, he was outside, trimming the hedges with quiet precision, as though nothing in the world could disturb him. He didn't look up when I stepped out of the car. For a moment, I thought he might ignore me completely, Dad. My voice cracked, softer now, stripped of pride, stripped of defiance. He finally looked at me, his eyes calm, steady, unreadable. Not angry, not soft, just resolute. I ended it, I whispered, my throat tightening. With him, it's over. He nodded once, not in surprise, not even in satisfaction, but simply as though he had known this moment would come. Good. He said simply, it should have ended the moment he told me to leave. Tears blurred my vision as I stepped closer. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to fix us. He set the shears aside, wiping his hands on his jeans. His voice was firm, but not unkind. You don't fix it with words, Claire. You fix it with time, with respect. With actions that show me you remember who stood by you before anyone else. That's how you fix it? I broke then, completely. My knees hit the grass, my sobs tearing from me with no dignity, no control. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry for forgetting. For letting him treat you that way? Or not being the daughter you deserved. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then I felt it, his hand steady and strong, resting gently on my shoulder. You'll always be my daughter, he said softly. Even when you forget me, even when you hurt me. But don't ever ask me to stand in the shadows again. If a man wants to love you, he has to love all of you. And that includes the father who raised you. I lifted my eyes to his, and for the first time in years, I truly saw him. Not just as my father, but as the man who had carried an entire world on his back so that I could walk freely. And I knew then that no man, no wedding, no illusion could ever replace that. We didn't hug. We didn't collapse into a perfect ending. We just stood there in the quiet of the afternoon, the distance between us smaller than it had been. The night before, that was enough. Because some stories don't end with a fairy tale. Some stories end with truth. And sometimes truth is all we need.